Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
We're going to continue our contemplation of the fruit of the Spirit being self-control. As I mentioned last week, there are areas in our lives where in some areas we have a mastery of that particular area. We could practice self-control, and even the best of us, sometimes we have areas in which we lack self-control. Sometimes that's control of our emotions, sometimes that's control of our words, sometimes that's control of our anger, sometimes that's control of our thoughts. And so there are various areas in which we can be strong and weak in self-control at the same time. Last week, we contemplated our third observation was that the rules of the world do have the appearance of wisdom as revealed in the three forms of self-imposed worship, false humility, and harsh treatment of the body. So it is possible that the world's value system involves a certain element of self-control. If you look, for example, we're talking about self-control and resulting in self-discipline, but if you look at, for example, the bodybuilders, well, they have a lot of self-control in what they eat and disciplining themselves in when they get up and do their exercise on a regular basis, but they may have trouble controlling their anger. And so just because one is gifted in self-control in one area doesn't mean that they're gifted in self-control in all areas. What is important is that we maintain self-control in our spiritual lives and in our emotional lives and in our thought lives and in our actions. So we don't practice self-control as a form of self-imposed worship or false humility or just simply for the sake of harsh treatment of the body. No, we practice self-control because we are a reflection of God and His love and His mercy and His compassion and His forgiveness before others. And so if we can't practice self-control, then others can't see God in us. So that's why Paul said in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any has any grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And then he says, over all these virtues, put on love, because love is what makes it possible to practice self-control internally. And then the fourth thing we saw last week was the rules of the world lack any value in actually restraining sensual indulgences. In other words, the heart, we might be able to control the actions. We might be able to control the words that come out of our mouths. We might be able to control the visual representation. Like, for example, in America, it is considered good to be your genuine self. And so sometimes people will just go ahead and express their anger or express their the fact that they dislike their grievances. And that's expressing their genuine self. Here in Japan, by the Japanese own definition, actually, they have three faces. The three faces are the face that they present to the public, and it's got to be nice, it's got to be good, it's got to be kind, and then the face that they present in their family. But the third face is the actual self that they don't even express to anybody. And there is a certain amount of wisdom to being genuine, showing your true self, but only as we are able to practice self-control, and only as we are able to control our thoughts, control our words, control our emotions, and control our actions, are we able to be our genuine self and still live a life that is pleasing to God. And so the rules of the world lack any value in actually restraining sensual indulgences because the image, the outside, is all that matters. There's a lot being said these days about we're all on Facebook right now, and there's a lot being said right now about the image that you see on Facebook, the things that people portray on Facebook, and they'll have the beautiful houses that they're living in, and the beautiful meals that they're eating, and the beautiful places they get to go, and people say, oh, that person really has their life together. That person is really doing really, really well. And the reality is what they present may not necessarily be what is actually happening in their life. They may be broke and just making it look like they're wealthy. They may be having some emotional struggles and just make it look like they're happy. And so the rules of the world lack any value in actually restraining sensual indulgences, which is what he says in verse 23, the second part of verse 23 that we read just a minute ago. Such regulations indeed have the appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgences. So Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, and we're going to read verses 1 through 5 and 7 through 8 and then 10 through 15, and then maybe we'll expound more upon this a little bit in our subsequent Bible study times together. But Paul says to Timothy, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. Why will there be terrible times in the last days? Because people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, and slanderous. So without self-control, you are left with nothing but an inability to do that which you know you should be doing for the sake of others, for the good of others. All that is left is my life, my needs, my desires. And so Paul says there will be terrible times because people will be self-seeking and self-serving over anything else. But he explains why. After saying there will be people who will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, he says, without self-control. And then since they don't have self-control, they become brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And they have a form of godliness. They believe that they are spiritual, but they deny the power of God in their lives because their lives are all about themselves. I, several years ago, was talking with an individual. He was from America, and he was talking about how he was valued spirituality and how he tried to be spiritual. And as I talked with him for about an hour, and basically every single sentence that came out of his mouth was, I do this, and I think this, and I like to practice this, and his spirituality was based upon his desires and needs, which is what Paul is describing here, having a form of godliness, but denying its power, the life-changing power that is only in Christ. Have nothing to do with such people, he says, because they are always learning, but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And then he gives the example in the Old Testament, just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these teachers oppose the truth. We know that God has revealed to us his truth, and yet they reject God's truth because they focus on my truth and what I think is the right thing to do, rather than what God says is the right thing to do. So he says, so also these teachers oppose the truth. They are men of depraved minds who, as far as their faith is concerned, are rejected. And then he continues and he says, you, however, know all about my teaching, my way of life, My purpose, faith, patience, love, endurance, persecution, sufferings. What kind of things happened to me in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra? The persecutions I endured. Yet, the Lord rescued me from all of them. In fact, the reality is, everyone who wants to live godly and a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So how we choose to feel about that persecution, how we choose to respond to that persecution, that's a matter of controlling the emotions, controlling the heart, controlling the mind. He says, if you live godly in Christ Jesus, you're going to suffer persecution, while evildoers and imposters will go from bad to worse. It just keeps getting worse, deceiving and being deceived. That's interesting, because the problem with thieves is, you've heard the expression, there's no honor among thieves, because a thief will betray a fellow thief just as he would betray anybody else. Why? Because he's a thief. But as for you, continue what you've learned and have become convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it, and how from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. We have our salvation. We grow in Christ. The end result is we learn to practice self-control.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.